So people began to realize that geometry is not fixed, but there are other ways of understanding space. So there are there's metrical geometry, and then which is Euclidean, and then there's Riemannian geometry and Lobachevskian geometry, and I forget what happens there with parallel lines. Anybody remember what happens in Lobachevsky? Anyway, they meet, I don't forget, right? So then there are these different geometries. And then they realized that all these different geometries are expressions of something still more abstract, which is called projective geometry. And in projective geometries, all parallel lines meet at one point. It's hard to describe this. It's really interesting, right? But what I'm suggesting is that as we move into these higher geometries, there's metrical, Lobachevskian, Riemannian, then there's projective geometry, and projective geometry has fewer rules than any of the other metrical geometries do. So it's freer, it's less constrained. And then you go beyond that to topology, and topology is even less constrained. So to get from topology to projective geometry, you have to define straight lines. And to get from projective geometries to the metrical geometries, you have to define parallel lines. So what I'm trying to get at is that we can describe space in less and less constrained ways. I think that the transphysical worlds can probably be characterized by these various forms of meta-geometry, so that they are space-time structures which are fundamentally less constrained than the metrical geometry by which our waking world is dominated. So this is at least a gesture in the direction of this new type of science that I'm talking about. Right? So we have the possibility of a science of the transphysical worlds based on a essentially mathematical understanding of their space-time structure. We have the possibility of a yogic exploration of the transphysical world based on the systematic cultivation of siddhi, or supernormal human capacities, currently supernormal human capacities, and the continuity of consciousness. And we have the option of exploring the operation of the transphysical forces in waking life and beyond in a more psychological or mythic kind of language. So I see these as three broad ways in which science can open up to a new transphysical domain. So I'm presenting these ideas to you as lures for feeling. Right? I'm not claiming this is the truth, because I really don't know. Right? What I'm telling you is that after decades of sustained meditation on these issues, this is the best explanation that I've come up with so far. And I'm excited about it because it is so open-ended. Right? What this language that I'm presenting allows is the framing of hypotheses. In this language, for example, I showed how we could frame 4 or 5 different hypotheses about reincarnation in this language, right? And there are other hypotheses that we can frame. It gives us a way of discoursing about this larger cosmos and of making hypotheses which hopefully we can find ways of testing. Right? So this is not, I feel like the person I'm identifying with most in history is Francis Bacon. Right? Francis Bacon, he's the guy who started the scientific revolution by opening up scientific method. And what I'm trying to do here is to develop a metaphysical understanding which lets us frame a method which will let us construct a science of this larger universe. And so every single one of you and everyone watching this tape, this DVD, can participate in the larger work of defining and exploring the larger universe that we already inhabit. So that's what I want to say. And we can have one final discussion before we're done for our weekend.
I don't remember specifically which one of these it is. Maybe you can clarify. It was either in supersymmetry or in superstring theory, where the mathematics involves 10 or 11 different dimensions. Mm-hmm. Do you know if there's any correlation between those dimensions and the transphysical? Are they like totally different?
I believe they're totally different.
Okay.
Basically, I mean, I don't know a huge amount about it, but my sense is that when scientists are talking about dimensions in that sense, they're talking about mutually orthogonal dimensions. And mutually orthogonal dimensions, assuming the space has zero curvature, right, permit measurability. And whatever can be measured, I claim, is part of the physical world. So it may be that a full accounting for the physical world requires more than 3 dimensions, but it's still the physical world. And it's still essentially Euclidean geometry that's being considered there. And I don't think that, and again, once you have Euclidean geometry with zero curvature, you have measurable distances. And I don't think that the transphysical worlds operate that way in terms of measurable distance. Distance is measured, is figured in some other way in transphysical worlds. An understanding of what constitutes transphysical distance is the key to the kind of science of the transphysical I'm talking about. But I don't know what that is. That's one of those big questions.
So the parapsychological science that you're talking about, how is that different than, say, what a Vedic culture has come up with? Like, do they have something like that?
No.
And
I think this is new.
Why is this new?
I like to think that this whole venture into industrialism and science that we've gone through for the last 400 years will have meaning and will somehow give us a gift as we go forward. Now, no culture that we know of before us has developed science as we did. And when I've investigated it, what seems to me to be the case, obviously, it's measurement that makes the difference, right? And measurement is possible because the space-time, the time-space in which the inorganic entities in our cosmic epoch function is metrical, because you have to have a metrical space-time for measurement. So once scientists realized that, once they got it, oh yeah, you can measure distance and you can analyze how causal effects are affected by distance, all of science opens up, all of modern science opens up. Now, can we generalize that into the transphysical worlds? Can we have a science of the transphysical worlds that in some way resembles modern science? Well, we can only do that if we can logically analyze the distance function in transphysical worlds. Nobody's ever done that we know of. So this would be something new, right? I'm not sure how useful it would be, but it might be very useful. And that's a speculation. I have an intuition that could be a very interesting and powerful thing to do and useful.
Then the question of useful, because a lot of those traditions would also warn against, say, focusing too much on building cities or something like that.
Yes.
Like they would say, well,
Yes.
that's a dangerous path to go down.
Yes, it is a dangerous path. There are 2 things I want to say about that. And one of them is that for the past several thousand years, all of our major religious traditions have warned against the cultivation of the cities. Why is that? Now, Sri Aurobindo tells us that part of the reason is because people got impatient with the suffering on the world, and they said, let's just get the hell out of here. Let's go to nirvana, or let's go to heaven or something. And since the cities are just going to get us more involved in the world, they're a dangerous distraction from the quest for cessation. And Sri Aurobindo says that we have lost the greater patience of the ancient sages who realized that we don't just want to get away from here, we actually want to take on the evolutionary work of incarnating the divine here on the planet, and that the cultivation of the cities is a very valuable step in bringing the divine into our planetary sphere. So, in evolution, one way of understanding evolution is that evolution is a process through which the energies and presences of the transphysical worlds become more and more involved in the physical world. So, for example, the formation of cells is when the vital world beings pour themselves into the physical world. And then the formation of the nervous system is when the mental beings pour themselves into the physical world. And so our job as evolving beings, learning how to more and more fully bring the knowledge and power of the transphysical worlds to bear in the physical world. And that's what the cultivation of cities is all about. Right? So the notion that we ought to cultivate city goes against all these prescriptions, right? The George Hansen book I mentioned, The Trickster and the Paranormal, he points out that there's a certain way in which parapsychological phenomena are inimical to our current institutional structures. Right? There's I don't think there's a university in the country that has a parapsychology department. How come? Right? There's some way in which it doesn't mix with our current way of thinking. So it is dangerous. Right? And as we cultivate city, there's always a tremendous danger of inflation that comes with it. And when we get involved with the transphysical, there are entities in the transphysical worlds who are inimical to our welfare, and we have to deal with them. So there's danger here, no question about it. But our current technology is so dangerous, it's killing our entire biosphere, right? So we can't entirely shy away from danger. I'm convinced that, as I said before, that industrialism is not going to carry us very much further forward, and that we need a mode of production or a way of dealing with the world in which we cultivate the wisdom and the power of the transphysical and use it to garden the planet. Right? This is not without danger. This is not a milquetoast kind of proposition, right? There will be failures. There will be people who will be hurt. There are dangers here, but I think they're worth taking. And again, I will back this up by suggesting that we put this in the context of a much larger and more earth-friendly spirituality in which we really take on the burden of evolving the planet instead of simply trying to escape the planet and considering all these powers as distractions. So there are moral dangers here, and we have to be sensitive to them. Moral dangers and practical dangers in all of these different things that I'm discussing. But I don't think it's as black and white as some of the old religious traditions would have us believe. I think there's huge promise here, as well as significant danger.
How does this philosophical framework for understanding reality inform a new scientific method that may be more amenable to studying and exploring things, say, related to consciousness?